It's obvious to basically everyone except the Hive Queendom that the Queendom would lose the war before it even started. The Queendom was barely industrialized, still maintained a loosely feudal system of government, and had neither the economic resources nor the manpower to engage its numerous and powerful neighbors in an extended conflict. Now, the decision to go to war wasn't completely idiotic, it was just kinda idiotic. The Queendom's most significant neighbors were the Sisaban Commonwealth and the Allegrian Empire, both of which were engaged in the Fourth Allegri-Sisaban War. These nations had a long history of just absolutely despising each other for economic, political, and racial reasons, and Hive strategists found it unlikely that either nation would agree to a ceasefire if their enemy was attacked by a third party. Of the two neighbors, the Commonwealth was a much more grave concern. The Commonwealth was a heavily industrialized titan. Major corporations practically ran the nominally democratic nation, and a brutal, well funded system of municipal police suppressed any chance of labor, racial, or political advancement. As a result, it was a powerful, wealthy, and politically stable, if unhappy, nation. In contrast, the Allegrian Empire was aging, battered, and weak. While historically conservative, the young Emperor Karl Rauter recently implemented a variety of reforms. These reforms landed right in the sweet spot of being pretty good, but also not good enough, which gave millions of newly freed serfs turned peasants freedom of movement, and also failed to give them any incentive to stick around. This caused a major emigration wave out of the empire and into the Commonwealth, seeking a not good, but better way of life. Consequently, the Allegrian Empire was even weaker than it usually was. The Hive Queendom, internally whipped up into a hyper-mega-ultra-nationalist quasi-fascist frenzy, was confident in its ability to take on the world. What became known as the Hive War began as the Hive's Royal Army, or HRA, launched a swift and merciless surprise offensive on the Allegrian Empire's southeastern borders. With the Imperial Army tied up fighting the Commonwealth on the west, only skeletal reserves were stationed in the region. The poor transportation infrastructure of the Empire allowed the HRA to sweep through much of its territory. The early war was much in the Hive's favor, as it was only fighting the Allegrian Empire. However, the unforeseen development of the international coalition, spearheaded by the liberal Ricalian Protectorate, quickly halted any advance. The Ricalian Protectorate was a major maritime power, situated across the ocean from the Queendom. Its financially significant merchant marine gave the Protectorate a persuasive position with the Commonwealth. Concerned with the political consequences of a Hive victory, the Protectorate called in its favors and formed the International Coalition, whose members consisted of the Protectorate, the Commonwealth, and the Allegrian Empire, as well as many other minor nations across the world. However, the Commonwealth and the Empire both refused to halt their own war despite their membership. The Hive simply failed to consider that both nations were powerful enough to fight each other and the Hive at once. Fighting a three-front land and naval war, the Hive was immediately stopped in its tracks. In particular, the vast wealth of the Commonwealth and Protectorate posed a major problem on the home front. A fatal embargo from both nations was imposed far earlier than expected, preventing the Hive from stockpiling its planned supplies. As it was pushed on the defensive, the Queendom entered what became known as the Steel Crisis, which was a major shortage of not only steel, but also food, leather, and essentially every warfighting resource. Steel helmets were replaced with caps. Jackboots were replaced with low boots and puttees. Ill-fitting, awkward uniforms became the norm as the draft began reaching for older teenagers. The Hive adapted doctrine towards long-term defense, initially pulling back troops and conceding small amounts of territory to consolidate large, fortified, entrenched positions. The coalition was locked in deadly trench warfare with the Queendom. Both factions made desperate attempts to exploit weak points in the other's lines in order to make a decisive breakthrough and pierce the enemy's front. After 2.5 years, the Commonwealth was eventually able to exploit a critical opening in the Hive's lines, breaking through and threatening to encircle a significant portion of the Hive's fatally interconnected front line. The Hive withdrew and returned to a war of movement. At this point, the Hive's fate was sealed. The nation was starving and its borders closed in. But even with the writing on the wall, the Queendom refused to surrender, causing the war to last another 2 bloody years. The length of the conflict was also owed to poor cooperation within the international coalition, particularly because of the Fourth Allegri-Sisaban War, which continued before, during, and after the Hive War. the Hive was willing to make shocking sacrifices to prolong the war. Every Hive town and city, from the major to the minor, was paid for in the blood of countless coalition soldiers, Hive soldiers, and civilians. The minimum age of the draft bled lower and lower, while the maximum age climbed and climbed with each defeat. Eventually, children and the elderly were called up for service in what became known as the 9 to 90 policy. By the end of the war, the Hive was hollow, gored, and extensively depopulated.